The Jets have a talented and deep running back room. How far can they take this offense? We'll discuss on today's episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, August 2nd, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangrenNation.com. Thank you so much for making this show your first watch or your first listen every day. This show's free and available on all platforms. A big shout out to subscribers to this podcast. And to join that group, all you have to do is hit the subscribe button. You'll get notifications as new episodes are posted, and you'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Yesterday, we discussed Zach Wilson, who is clearly a very important player for the Jets this season and for the future of the franchise. But I think this offense in 2022 is going to be built around the run game. And there are a couple of different components of the run game. Of course, blocking matters. Your offensive line needs to open holes. Your tight ends need to assist, even out on the perimeter to a certain degree. It helps if your wide receivers can block. But the Jets have made some big investments in the last couple of years at the running back position. And today we're going to talk about the group of running backs the Jets have, expectations for them, and why they're so important for this team. Now, the running back position over the last 25, 30 years has decreased in importance in the NFL. And I think a lot of this you could trace back to the Mike Shanahan Broncos teams of the 1990s, the late 90s, and early 2000s, where the platoon system, having guys move in and out of the lineup, has kind of come into play in the league, and it's kind of spread across the league. You now have a backfield by committee for most teams. You have guys going in and out. Maybe you have guys play certain roles for the team. Some teams may have a power back and a speed back. Other teams just like to shuffle guys in and out. You like to keep your backs fresh. It's really decreased the value of backs in the NFL. There are very few pure three-down backs anymore in this league. In fact, I think many people would tell you that of the relevant positions, if we take out things like fullback and long snapper and punter and kicker, of the positions that are regular, you see regular playing time, running back might be the least valuable position in today's NFL because there's so much platooning going on. There's so many guys going in and out of the lineup, and I think analytics play a role in this. I think numbers show you that offensive line has more to do with running back success than was previously thought. This goes back to what Denver did. If you go back to what Denver did in the days of Terrell Davis, and then after he got injured, it seemed like every year they were plugging in some late round pick and getting producing 1,000-yard back behind their offensive line and their zone blocking scheme. Now, the thing about positional value, though, in the NFL that I think people miss is just because a position is considered a low-value position, that doesn't mean that there are zero impact players. It just means that there are less impact players than you see at other positions. But a great player is a great player. Today in the NFL, is linebacker a big impact position? No, but there are still great linebackers, a handful of them, who impact the games. The same could be said at the safety position, and I think the same could be said at the running back position. I mean, if you watched the Colts last year, I think you understood that Jonathan Taylor, although a running back, is a big-time impact player. He's a guy who changes your team. And I think that that's the hope the Jets have for Breece Hall. I'd never like to put too much on a rookie, but it's a little bit different at the running back position because, of course, at the running back position, it's really about whether or not you can make it happen with the ball in your hands. And I like to think for a second about what value does a running back really bring? Now, the way things are blocked in the NFL, if you block a 3-yard hole for a back, most backs are going to be able to get you 3 yards. So what excess value does a running back bring? Well, first of all, the ability to make guys miss, the ability to run through contact. Pro Football Focus does a great stat, which is average yards after contact, which gives you some sort of insight into maybe extra yards a back is creating. But for me, beyond that, there are two big areas where a running back adds value. The first is in the passing game, and you see it in today's NFL. A lot of backs are listed as running backs in the program on whatever their statistical web page is, but they're really more hybrid players. You can stick them in the slot, they can get them the ball in screens, they can run receiver routes, many of them. That's one area where I think not all running backs are created equal. But the other big area I think is in the open field. And I'm talking like maybe 10 yards down the field, because once you get to like the 10-yard mark, it's really mostly about what you can create. Those first 5 yards are mainly about what the offensive line creates for you. And of course, there's some degree of nuance in there. There's some times where you can run through an arm tackle or something like that in the first 5 yards. And sometimes you have great blocking down the field. Sometimes guys get down the field and help you out. But once you get like 10 yards down the field, it's really about, can you make guys miss one-on-one? Do you have that extra gear to run away from other defenders? And that's really, I think, the big area where a great running back comes into play. Can he hit those home runs? And I think the Jets have hopes that Breece Hall can be that kind of guy. And the reason I say that is, listen, to trade up in the early second round for a running back in today's NFL, it's a sign you think he's going to be a great player. It's a sign you think he's going to be that type of difference maker, because otherwise you would not do it, because it's very easy to find a competent back. Finding a special back, that's different, and that's the reason you go out and get a Breece Hall. And you look at Breece Hall, first of all, you look at him on film, he looks very impressive. But beyond that, he's a guy with a lot of different attributes. He's a bigger back. He's around 220, but he's got that breakaway speed. So not only is he a guy who can create that excess yardage, and yes, he can contribute in the passing game as well, but he's also a guy who can stay on the field. He's probably going to be able to take a pounding because of his big frame. So he's a guy who kind of brings everything to the table. And when we're talking about the way the Jets are set up, I talked about this a lot yesterday. You can listen to yesterday's podcast. You don't want everything to be in Zach Wilson's hands. You, as a franchise, have a job. And that job is to lift up Zach Wilson. And I think too frequently in the NFL, teams draft quarterbacks early, and they expect these quarterbacks to be the savior of the franchise, which is really not fair to these quarterbacks, because they're stepping into the NFL. They're stepping into maybe the hardest position to play in professional sports, the biggest transition where you have so much going on and you're in the spotlight. You can't ask these quarterbacks to do everything. Now, to succeed in the NFL as a quarterback, you have to be able to occasionally lift your team up. And as you get later into your career, as you get into year 7, year 8, year 9, that's a point where maybe you know enough, maybe the game's slowed down enough, you're comfortable enough in the passing concepts, you're comfortable enough in all the complex defensive looks, where you really can lift a team up. But for the first couple of years, yes, you'd like to see the quarterback lift the team up occasionally. You'd like to see it happen. You'd like to see flashes of it. But you can't ask a quarterback to carry the whole load. And I think the way the Jets have set themselves up, there are a couple different ways you can build around a quarterback. You can build what's known as a quarterback-friendly scheme, where you're in the shotgun all the time, giving the quarterback a chance to scan the defense pre-snap. You can use motion. You can go out and get yourself a number one receiver. In an ideal world, you do all of these things to help the quarterback out. But another way you can do it is just give the quarterback a good run game to lean on, so your quarterback's not in bad situations. Because as much as we talk about interceptions, especially when we talk about mistakes being the result of bad decision making, the numbers don't lie. The numbers tell you that interceptions tend to be the result of being in a bad situation, whether you're in a third and long frequently, whether you're constantly playing from behind because your defense can't get stops. So really, you have to build a team around a quarterback to keep him out of those situations. And I really have come to feel like in the NFL, not enough attention is paid to just the mental side of things. Because can you imagine being a young quarterback, your first or second year, especially in a city like New York, where your team is constantly struggling, you're losing games, as much as these guys say that, as much as they shouldn't, and as much as they say they don't, you read the headlines online, listen to the talk radio, listen to podcasts, you know that they are. It's got to be tough. And I think sometimes what happens is just failure overwhelms you. Even if you're a really tough guy, even if you have a lot of mental toughness, at some point it just becomes too much, because too much is placed on you and the team can't succeed, and you're put in these impossible situations where you have to carry everything. Jets don't want that. The Jets want to be able to lean on the run game, and that's really the way this team was built. If you look at the way the offensive line was built, and if you look at what they did to get Breece Hall, I think they want Breece Hall to be the type of guy who just takes over games, who takes over this offense. And running back is one spot where you can get immediate contributions. So I think Breece Hall is going to be the key point of this offense. I think he's going to be the number one guy on this offense. I think this offense is really going to run through Breece Hall. And I think we have to hope that he's as good as advertised. And I think he will add things to the passing game. I don't know how complex his route tree is going to be, but I think in the screen game, the Jets will be able to utilize him. And so much about this, to me, is taking as much off Zach Wilson's plate as possible. Because even if we're just talking about a screen pass, that's an easy play. You want to make things easy for Zach. So that's a play where you can take off. If you need, say, 30 first downs to win a game, you want to make as few of them as possible come because Zach Wilson had to do something spectacular. You want to just allow him to get the ball into his playmaker's hands in a very easy way. And this will also happen to the receiver position. The Jets have guys at the receiver position who are talented in space. But I think Breece Hall is going to have a big load as a rookie. I think he's going to be a key part of this offense. And I think, I don't want to put Jonathan Taylor expectations on him because Jonathan Taylor just had a historic season. A unanimous choice for first-team All-Pro. In fact, here's an amazing piece of information for you. There was no second team All-Pro running back last year because what happens is everybody gets one vote for a player. You only vote for one running back. The second team All-Pro is the guy who finishes second, but because Jonathan Taylor was unanimous first team All-Pro, they could not have a second team All-Pro because nobody else got an All-Pro vote. So I don't want to put that sort of pressure on Breece Hall, but make no mistake about it, expectations are high for Breece Hall. When you look at his talent, when you look at the way the Jets moved up for him, and when you look at his fit in this scheme, the Jets run a lot of zone blocking plays, which essentially require you to, first of all, read blocks effectively, and second of all, you need to be able to identify holes and then hit them immediately and just get up the field. And I think Breece Hall has the breakaway speed to turn some what could be moderate runs into big plays. I think he's got the ability in the pass catching game to help the Jets out there, help Zach Wilson come along. There's a lot on Breece Hall. I think he's up to the task. I hope he's up to the task because I've spent the entire offseason hyping him up. So if he's not that good, I know I'm going to hear about it. But more importantly, the Jets need him. The Jets need him to help Zach Wilson. He's the type of guy. You always hear people talk about tight ends being a young quarterback's best friend. Tight ends usually aren't your go-to guys on offense, though. A running back, a great run game, that's the sort of thing that can really be a quarterback's best friend, and the Jets certainly hope Breece Hall can provide it. But Breece Hall is not the only talented young back in the backfield for the Jets. When we continue here on the Locked On Jets podcast on this Tuesday, we'll talk about a guy who really impressed as a rookie last year, Michael Carter. What are expectations for him? That's what we'll discuss ahead here on this Tuesday episode. Of course, hindsight is 20/20, and you can't change the past. I know Jets fans would love to change the last decade, but it's not possible to do. But what if you could get a little help from your future self? Maybe you'd ask to borrow a little cash, and now you can with Dave. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy a wedding gift, or catch up on bills. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hang-ups. There's no interest and no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and you need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve, member FDIC. Thank you again for making Locked On Jets your first listen or your first watch every day. We are free and available on all platforms. We're talking about the running back position for the Jets, a position that in today's NFL usually doesn't have a lot of value, but for the Jets it could have a lot of value because they have a couple of talented young backs. One is Breece Hall. Another's a little bit more proven. That's Michael Carter, who had a very solid rookie season last year. I was really excited about Michael Carter because I can't count how many times after the draft I tell you the Jets got this really talented guy, and then he ends up not being nearly as good as I expected him to be. I feel like Michael Carter in the fourth round really lived up to the hype. He showed that he's the number one back in this league, and now with the addition of Breece Hall, he's almost a overqualified number two back. And that's helpful because if you ever have an injury, now you've got a starting caliber back right behind Breece Hall. And I think like as Jets fans, sometimes, especially over the last decade, these teams have been so untalented that we get into this mindset that if a guy's decent at his position, then you can't touch it. Then he cannot be upgraded upon. When really what you should be looking to do is stack talent. You should be looking to constantly upgrade. And this is a great example of why. Because, listen, the Jets would have been fine with Michael Carter as their number one back. But now they got a running game they can build this thing around. And I think Breece Hall's the type of back. I think Breece Hall's the rare type of back who can be a full-time back. Michael Carter, I think, is like a 1A in this league. He showed last year. He was a little undersized, but the funny thing about Michael Carter is that I don't think he plays small. I think if you look at the numbers in any power situation, he was never a weakness. And in some power situations, he was very good. He's a tough runner inside, and yes, he also can contribute in the passing game. And it's going to be a little interesting to see how the Jets allocate these carries early. I think Breece Hall's talent's going to take over. In many cases, what you see is the incumbent kind of takes the lead at the beginning of the season, and teams force the young guy to earn his spot on the field. And then as the younger guy, and I'm talking younger guy, Michael Carter is a second-year player, so it's not like he's an old player, but he's the incumbent. And frequently the incumbent starts the year as the number one guy, and then the other guy who's the rookie kind of earns the job. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's what happened through the season. But whenever Breece Hall needs a rest now, Michael Carter goes in, and you're not going to lose a whole lot by having Michael Carter. Those snaps that last year maybe were going to Ty Johnson, and maybe going to somebody who wasn't that talented, are now going to be going to Michael Carter. It just makes the Jets a better team all around. And it makes it easier to build this thing around the run game, because now you've got this tandem. Now you've got two really solid backs. And there are not many teams that really are built around the running back position offensively in this league. And listen, the Jets are going to need their offensive line to play really well for them. But now you've got a great 1-2 punch here. You've got Hall, who I think can do a little bit of everything, and Carter, the tough runner inside. I think that this is going to be a really good duo for the Jets. And not only is it going to be a really good duo, it's going to be a really good duo for years to come, because these are both young guys. These are, and this is one of the things that's been frustrating for the Jets through the years, especially over the last decade. I mean, how many times have the Jets brought in some big name running back at the end of his career in the last 10 to 12 years? I mean, it began with LaDainian Tomlinson, and I'm not saying everybody has this memory of LaDainian Tomlinson being a great back for the Jets. He was really past his prime, and the reason everybody has this memory of LaDainian Tomlinson being great for the Jets is that his first 5 games or so were spectacular in 2010. After that, if you look, there was a big fall off. He was a very ordinary back the rest of his Jets tenure. Chris Johnson in 2014, a former 2,000-yard back. It wasn't terrible, but it really wasn't any sort of a difference maker. Matt Forte back in 2016 when they brought him in. Of course, we don't need to tell you what happened with Le'Veon Bell. You had Frank Gore back in 2020, who at the time they signed him, I hope was just kind of a locker room guy who maybe got a couple touches a game, and Adam Gase built the entire offense around him. And Frank Gore, who was a very good back, essentially just hung around the NFL to pad his statistics. I think by the time he was with the Jets, he was past his productive tenure. Meanwhile, who was the best Jets back of the past decade? Probably Bilal Powell, a guy they drafted in the 4th round in 2011, who never really got his chance. It feels like this is the new way the Jets are building. And we talk about not putting a lot of resources into the running back position, but as much as anything, you want to get young, you want homegrown guys, because running backs don't have a long shelf life. And the Jets for years have been focused on bringing in these older guys, these big names, these guys with tremendous track records who used to be really good, but are now past their prime, now at the end of their careers. The Jets should have been investing in young backs with fresh legs, and they're finally doing that. And now with Hall and Carter, it finally feels like you've got a tandem that can be here for a couple of years and help lift up Zach Wilson early in his career. There are a couple other Jets backs to discuss, though, and as we conclude this Tuesday episode of Locked On Jets, we'll talk about some of the guys lower on the depth chart who are looking to make a name for themselves. That's as we continue here on this Tuesday episode. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're talking about the Jets running back position, a position that is more important for the Jets than it is for a lot of other teams, because the Jets are going to lean on their running backs to help Zach Wilson out. We've talked about a couple of the young guys the Jets have. There is a veteran on this roster, and that's Tevin Coleman. And to me, he's like the perfect third back for this team, because even though I just went on and on about the importance of having young running backs, having one veteran in there in a part-time role is not the worst thing in the world, especially a guy like a Tevin Coleman, who throughout his career has been one of the better running backs in the receiving game in the league. I shouldn't just say pass catching, because he's been more than a pass catcher. He's been a tremendous route runner. He's been a guy who, from the backfield, can run receiver caliber routes. But beyond that, he can also help in pass protection. And when you're talking young players, you never really know what you're going to get in pass protection. A lot of college systems don't ask a whole lot from their backs as far as blocking against pass rushers goes. So you want a veteran, a steady presence back there as a veteran in Tevin Coleman. I don't know why the Jets used Ty Johnson so much in the pass catching role last year, in the receiving role last year, because they had Tevin Coleman. Now, I know Coleman was banged up for a stretch there, but it seemed like they preferred Ty Johnson to that role. Really tough to understand. I think Tevin Coleman's a great fit for the Jets as a number 3 back, a guy who is going to be steady-handed. If you need to step up for a game or two, I still think there might be enough juice there where he can produce for you. He doesn't have that game-breaking speed that he had in his Atlanta days. I mean, he was a home run hitter in his Atlanta days. He doesn't have that anymore, but even Tevin Coleman in decline still has enough speed, enough toughness, enough grit, enough power, I think, to produce, as long as you're not asking too much out of him. He's clearly near the end of his career. Clearly his best days are gone, but Still a guy who I think can bring something to the table in a very limited role. That role that I was talking about with Frank Gore, that was the role I thought Frank Gore was going to have in 2020 when the Jets signed him. Maybe good locker room guy, a couple carries a game when you need him. Maybe you need to rely on him once or for a game or two, but you don't want to rely on him full time, and that's where Tevin Coleman comes in, I think. Now, once we go a little bit deeper, you've got some younger guys. You've got Ty Johnson, who I just talked about, who could be at the end of the line for the Jets. A guy who's actually produced decent efficiency numbers on the ground, but the Jets have used him in the receiving role. He's not a receiver. He drops everything. So I don't know whether Ty Johnson has a spot on this team. If he does, I think they got to take him out of the receiving role, though. And with all of the receiving talent the Jets have in the backfield, there's really no excuse for Ty Johnson to have any sort of substantial role in the receiving game. I guess if they want to keep him around as an extra depth guy, if you need a couple of yards here or there, if somebody goes down, maybe that makes sense. But they've used him completely incorrectly. If Ty Johnson has a future on this team, it's as a runner, not as a receiver. Past Ty Johnson, you have LaMichael Pirine, who is probably at the end of the line. He was drafted back in 2020. I still don't I really did not like the pick at the time. The thing about LaMichael Pirine was when I went back to Florida and I watched his footage, there was nothing that really jumped out at me. He wasn't overly fast. He wasn't overly tough as a runner. He wasn't overly strong. He did have good hands. I mean, he could adjust when a ball was off target and pluck it in, but he wasn't elusive in the open field, not that dangerous in space. There was nothing really that impressed me that much, and I think if you've seen how little of a role he's had, kind of speaks volumes about what the Jets think of LaMichael Pirine. And of course, he was drafted for a different coaching staff, although he was drafted by the same GM. It was for a different coaching staff, so you don't know where Adam Gase saw him in his system, but with a new system in place, I'm not sure LaMichael Pirine has much of a place. And then after that, you have an undrafted rookie, Zonovan Knight out of NC State, a guy people are excited about. And listen, at the running back position, yeah, your odds are higher at finding a guy who's an undrafted free agent than they are at a lot of other spots. I don't think he's going to play a big role this year. I think he's a guy who could be destined for the practice squad, but a tough runner, somebody people may look to in the future. And who knows, if there are a couple of injuries, it wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world. The running back position every year, you see some guy rise from deep on the depth chart, step up, and help a team out. So maybe he can do that. But the Jets will live and die on the run game with Breece Hall and Michael Carter. This is a really good tandem I think the Jets have here. I think they've done a good job building this run game around Zach Wilson. And as much as I'm not a running back guy, if you've listened to this podcast for any stretch of time, you know I'm not a big running back guy, but I think the Jets have done a really good job at the running back position. The Jets are an exception in this league now because of what they have at running back. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Big shout out to subscribers to this show. If you want to join that group, just hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening or watching. You'll never miss an episode. Please give a 5-star review if you're listening on a podcast source, or a big thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Either of those help the channel out tremendously. Have a great Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we will have our weekly mailbag show.